Hello everybody, and welcome to the Module 4, Raising Capital, Topic 4.1, Securities video. We're going to start here with, let's see if I can switch over to this correctly. Okay, there we go. All right, so let's talk about where we are in our study of the law. We're now into the second half of class, and so having covered contracts and the business entities before that that are necessary to decide what contract you need and all the material bills on it. We're now in the blue circle, which I've entitled Raising Capital. That's our module 4. The reason for that is after your business is formed, looking in the green circle, after you understand how contracts work, the very first contracts you enter into in a business are those that deal with raising capital, because a business can't do anything unless it has capital to do it with. So it either gets capital from its lenders or its shareholders or owners, depending on the type of entity you have. So in Module 4, we will start with securities, and then we will also look at banking and secured transactions. We're going to be looking at banking both as a something that every company has to have. Yeah, every company has to have a bank, but then we also look at borrowing, debt, and secured transactions are one form of debt. Okay, so thinking about the 4 R's, the rules of the game, of course, are governed by the securities rules. So whom you can raise money from and how you can go about that process, those rules are created by the securities laws. The rights, the assets that you have are on the other side of this transaction. So and we'll talk about this later. For example, if you buy shares of stock, which many corporations do, they own shares of other corporations, that becomes an asset. If you're a type of company that lends money to other companies, which is almost every company, because trade payables are a form of debt, then your rights as a creditor are governed by the law in this area as well. Also, same thing with relationships. Here we are talking about the relationships between the company and its investors, that includes its debt holders as well as its equity holders. And then I would say that, as is the case with almost everything we talk about, there's an enormous amount of risk associated with this activity and doing it incorrectly. So that's why you have armies of lawyers like me. That's what I used to do. I was a securities lawyer for a good chunk of my career, and that's what I did. Helped my company not to get in trouble through the issuance of its securities, and we'll be talking about that in the topics here. Okay, so here are our 3 learning objectives. We're starting off with something that might seem a little out of place for a law class, but in order for the rest of this class to make sense, we have to make sure we have a understanding between you and me about what we mean by balance sheet accounts. So we're going to look at liabilities and equity. You're going to need to understand this in order to understand securities, in order to understand banking and secured transactions, in order to understand bankruptcy and other topics that we'll be talking about later. So we'll spend a few minutes in the first learning objective doing that. Then after that, after we've talked about what the balance sheet looks like, how it works, we're going to talk about what we mean by the term security. What is that? Security, it's actually, turns out it's a very broad term under the law. You might think about it in terms of stocks and bonds, but those are only 2 of a wide range of securities or documents that count as securities. Even things that you might not think about as securities are considered securities. And then in the last item is securities regulation. So it is a very, very heavily regulated area of the law. So, and this is what we'll talk about, the various laws that do regulate it, but it's not something that you can just go out and do usually outside of a very small group of maybe founding friends and family. Beyond that, you cannot sell securities without knowing your securities law. So we'll be talking about that as well. So those are our topics for this module, those are the learning objectives for this topic within this module, and I will see you in the learning objective number 1 video. Thanks.